As the world transitioned from biplane to monoplane, many new developments propelled aviation forward, and Hermann Göring himself fantasized with the idea of a fleet of brand new Zerstörers, or destroyers, that could take over the enemies of the Reich. A revolutionary aircraft concept was then born in the form of a heavy fighter destroyer, a vehicle that was compared to an impenetrable fortress back in the day. The Messerschmitt Bf 110 came out victorious after a hard-fought competition, primarily because of its long range and stout airframe, capable of penetrating the opponent's air defenses and protecting bombers along the way. However, its design also showed several shortcomings, and it's rumored that it ultimately won because of a petty fight between aviation leaders and the desire to embarrass Messerschmitt. Still, this powerful destroyer would eventually become one of the most emblematic aircraft out of Nazi Germany, and it would take the Royal Air Force almost a year to figure out the secret weapon behind an aircraft that was shooting down all of its tail gunners. A new concept. Before the outbreak of World War II, it was believed that bombers could get through enemy air defenses. However, the Germans soon realized the importance of a fighter to escort bombers, especially as their current escorts didn't have enough range to cross the Channel and penetrate Britain. By the mid-1930s, their medium twin-engine bombers had a range of 1,500 miles, while the Luftwaffe's single-engine fighter reached merely 400 miles. There was a specific need for a twin-engine fighter that resembled a small bomber. Its range ought to reach 1,500 miles and have a more potent armament than single-engine models. The concept of a heavy fighter was then born, and it would be a combat aircraft with enough weapons to render it unstoppable. Armed with up to 4 cannons and 4 machine guns firing forward, plus a rear gunner with a machine gun to protect the aft, the fighter could potentially protect bombers while opening up a path and leading the way. Initially, the multi-purpose aircraft was conceived as a Kampfzerstörer, or a fighter destroyer, later shortened to simply Zerstorer, a concept Hermann Göring idolized. This emblematic denomination pointed to the Luftwaffe's confidence in its elite heavy fighters. After pressure from Göring, the Ministry of Aviation issued a request for a multi-purpose fighter with increased range and a bomb bay. Whereas most designs had previously focused on single-engine fighter aircraft, the new airframe demanded twin engines, 3 seats, and an all-metal monoplane skin. There were 7 aviation companies at the time, but only 3 presented proposals: Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, or Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, and Henschel. Messerschmitt eventually emerged victorious and was provided the funds to start the prototyping phase. Their Bf 110 was vastly superior to its competitors in speed, range, and firepower. While Messerschmitt omitted the internal bomb load required by the Ministry of Aviation, its armament capabilities were significantly increased. Pressured by Ernst Udet, a prominent pilot who managed research and development for the Luftwaffe, the Ministry of Aviation reconsidered the Zerstorer concept, favoring Messerschmitt's design. It's widely rumored that the Bf 110 was only allowed into the competition because of Udet's influence, as he was a good friend of Willy Messerschmitt, an unpopular figure among his peers. Erhard Milch, in charge of the aircraft production, hated Messerschmitt, and some historians argue that when Milch approved the unpromising project, he did it to sink Messerschmitt once and for all. Absolute failure. By late 1935, the Bf 110 featured low cantilever wings and twin vertical stabilizers. The semi-monocoque aircraft was powered by 2 DB600A engines, and its remarkable speed of 350 miles per hour made it as fast or even faster than many fighters in early World War II. When the Bf 110 flew for the first time on May 12, 1936, it proved faster than initially intended. It was even faster than the current frontline fighter Bf 109. Although the technology behind the engines was somewhat unreliable and the aircraft was not nearly as maneuverable as desired, 4 pre-production units were ordered. Shortly after, the Focke-Wulf FW-187 and the Henschel HS-124 were rejected, and the Bf 110 was sent into full production. However, the aircraft was far from perfect. Adding extra fuel, plus the bigger airframe and the requested engines and propellers, the aircraft ended up with twice the weight of the Bf 109. What's more, its controls were particularly heavy, decreasing its maneuverability. A Luftwaffe test pilot once claimed, quote, "Pulling out of a dive required the strength of an ox. It was inconceivable to me how such an escort fighter could ever have gone into production." Still, during a demonstration dogfight between test pilot Hermann Wurster and Ernst Udet piloting a Bf 109, the Bf 110 was reported to fly tight turns just as well as the single-seater, and didn't stall despite executing steep turns. Furthermore, Göring regarded the Bf-110 in higher esteem than its predecessor and transferred the best Bf-109 pilots to the new fleet, much to the distress of the Luftwaffe. The elite destroyers eventually lived up to their reputation when they assaulted the Polish in 1939 and struck unprepared targets in France and Norway. Still, fighting outdated biplanes was not the same as facing the Royal Air Force. By the summer of 1940, the Bf-110s were entrusted with a strategic bombing campaign. Taking off from bases in occupied countries, they were to penetrate deep into British territory. However, when they came across Hurricanes and Spitfires equal to the German top-line Bf-109, the Bf-110s were rendered defenseless. The destroyer lacked maneuverability and acceleration against modern single-engine fighters, and the escorts were not able to protect the bombers as they were intended to. Instead, they had to defend themselves, forming defensive circles to guard each other's rear. Ultimately, out of the 237 Bf-110s that entered the battle, 223 were lost. Redemption. Royal Navy test pilot Eric Winkle Brown was one of the few Allied pilots to fly a Bf-110. After the war, he wrote that the Battle of Britain, quote, was to lead to a widespread belief that it was an unsuccessful design. This was in fact far from the case. The model eventually proved an effective ground attack aircraft in the North African theater of the war, as well as in Russia. The Bf-110 had now found its niche as a night fighter and became the leading night fighting aircraft of Nazi Germany. Equipped for sturdy instrument flight, it was ahead of most of its Luftwaffe contemporaries. Once the radar was invented, the aircraft featured a large cockpit that could accommodate a third crew member, a radar man, and his electronics in the middle seat. But even though the Germans had done considerable work during that decade, the British were credited with improving the cavity magnetron radar developed by the Germans, as the Bf-110s were fitted with airborne telefunken sets employing external antennas. Moreover, the aircraft carried the fierce Schrager Music upward-firing twin 20mm cannon. When a Bf-110 flew under a British bomber, it simply had to aim at the fuel tanks from underneath, and the British were taken entirely by surprise. The shot had to be precise and strike the wings, though, as a shot in the belly would set off an Avro Lancaster's bomb load, dooming the attacker as well as the attacked. It took the Royal Air Force 9 months to figure out where the attacks were coming from, as no tailgunners survived the furtive charges. It also became one of the European Air War's most significant intelligence debacles. Despite confessing to the existence of the slanted guns, a captured Luftwaffe mechanic was ignored until early 1944, when a downed Bf-110 was examined and the secret was revealed. Notably, most German night fighter aces flew the Bf-110 at some point during their careers. The Bf-110s were so effective with its star weapon that the highest-scoring night fighter pilot, Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, claimed, quote, "They seem to be lining up to be shot down." Schnaufer only flew a Bf-110 and achieved 121 victories in 164 sorties. In addition, the aircraft claimed many US B-17 and B-24 bombers in 1943, when they flew unescorted deep penetration raids in Europe. Final days. When the war ended, 6,170 Messerschmitt Bf-110s had been manufactured in multiple variants. However, the model would soon lose its rank as an air superiority fighter. As American fighter tactics evolved towards the last phase of the war, the model was rendered increasingly vulnerable. After the innovative single-engine P-51 Mustang entered the war, the Bf-110 became the hunted instead of the hunter. The American fighter bomber was able to fly at 450 miles per hour and had a range of 1,600 miles, all while maintaining maneuverability. The message was clear, and by early 1944, the Americans had air supremacy over the Reich. The heavy fighters' era had come to an end, and the new fighters were now unmatched in speed and agility despite their powerful armament. The Bf-110 was considered an archaic 1930s model by the time the war ended, and one of very few multi-engine aircraft still in combat. German engineers did not understand the new trend pointing towards single-engine aircraft with long range, which quickly overcame the Bf-110's drawbacks, and only 2 models survived to this day. Still, the destroyer was one of the most meaningful aircraft from World War II, and for a moment there, it gave the Royal Navy one hell of a headache. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more content about the World Wars, don't forget to subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels.